It's so great to have you on the show, and thank you for coming.
Hey, Paola, thank you for having me.
So you're the creator of breadcrumb.vc and network effects course, which I've done and is absolutely fantastic. So I can only recommend funders and other investors interested to do that. These are resources for investors and funders on everything network effects, but also you're part of the Atomico Angel program of investing in marketplaces and network effects. So what led you to angel investing in the first place? When did you first start? And how many businesses have you invested since?
It's been a long accidental journey. My first technical angel investment was I was working at this startup called App Annie. And my last few years there, 2018, 2019, I was starting to think about what next? What do I do next? And before App Annie, I was at this incubation rocket internet style firm in India that didn't go too well. So I had sort of some background in investing. And I thought I'll start dabbling in it. And back then, when you're a bit of an unknown, deal flow tends to be challenging. So I just sort of made some experimental investments here and there, tiny checks like 5K. Didn't really get serious about it until I started writing breadcrumb.vc, and then Atomico reached out. I knew a couple of people there from my App Annie days, and they asked, "Hey, would you be interested in doing this?" And by this time, because of breadcrumb VC, I had a lot of founders reaching out to me. I just didn't have the capital to invest, and so Atomico took care of that issue, and it became more serious once I was officially part of the program. So 2021 is when I more seriously started investing in network effect businesses.
And how many businesses have you invested since?
So as a part of the angel program, I've done 7. I've just committed my 8th one. Before that, there were about 3 or 4 more. So about 10 plus so far.
And when did you first get interested in marketplaces or actually network effects? Because you invest in any company that has some strong network effects, and also what led you to start breadcrumb VC?
That's another interesting story. So when I was at that incubation firm I mentioned in India, I was a little bored. And this is about 2013, 2014, and mobile was starting to take off back then, right? The whole iOS versus Android battle was happening, and I had ideas about it. I was reading stuff about it online. I disagreed with a lot of it. I didn't really know what to do. So I started a blog as a scrapbook, just as an outlet, because I guess I was annoying a lot of my friends with my ideas. And that became a bit bigger than I thought it would. It put me in touch with some interesting people. I kept writing about the mobile ecosystem, essentially how they work. And turns out network effects were a pretty core part of the mobile ecosystem. iOS and Android as platforms were built on network effects. A lot of the products built on them, Uber, for example, had network effects. So I just sort of kept exploring these ideas and ended up at a startup called App Annie, who hired me because they were reading my blog. And App Annie essentially was a data company selling to pretty much at one point every consumer-facing company in the world. A lot of App Annie customers had network effects of their own. Facebook, Snapchat, Uber, in the UK companies like Trainline, Tubestead, they were all customers. I got to study them more in depth over there. And sort of once I was thinking of my exit strategy at App Annie, I knew network effects had to be at the core of it. I knew I probably wanted to go back to VC or investing in some way, shape, or form because that's what I liked from my previous job. I kind of wanted to combine what I liked from my last 2 previous jobs. I didn't know how. I didn't know too many people in venture. I knew 2 people in venture in Europe back then. So I thought, let me start writing again. I have lots of ideas about this stuff. It's very different style that I'm going to be going after this time. So it probably requires a new brand. So the idea of breadcrumb is that it's a trail of breadcrumbs for founders. And the .vc is because when you write about network effects, you tend to attract an awful lot of academics, consultants, digital transformation people. And I kind of wanted to hammer home the idea that this is for startups. It's okay if you're from that world and you want to see it, but fundamentally, I didn't want to get sucked into that world. That's why the .vc. And so it's become interesting because I didn't expect I would start angel investing later that year. And so it's become a label for my investing.
I never asked you the story of breadcrumb VC and how did you start angel investing. So it's fascinating to know now. So now, what do you think are the biggest opportunities you see in the market and within marketplaces today and are most excited about?
It's a good question. And I'm probably going to cop out on this one because fundamentally, I think the idea is the realm of the founder. And generally, when investors try to step into that realm, we don't do very well. We try and force fit certain ideas, certain models that might or might not work very well. Instead, I try and focus on, I used to call myself a horizontal specialist, not a vertical specialist, and sort of fits in the same mold. So I evaluate the long-term potential of the network effect in this business, the near-term execution of the network effect in this business. The idea, fundamentally, I don't care. I'll evaluate the idea when it shows up, but the best investments I've made is when there is no way in hell I would have any inkling that this is the kind of company I would want to invest in. And that's the beauty of being an investor, right? You can continue being surprised by founders. So I try and in fact, every time I've tried to delve a little bit, there's a risk of getting married to certain ideas. And because you're not looking at it from a founder's point of view, sometimes those things have the potential to go wrong. So I'm very, very agnostic on ideas, very, very agnostic on verticals, very, very focused on the horizontal aspect of it. What is the long-term potential of this network effect? How is this network effect being executed? Doesn't answer your question, I know, but that's what I do.
No, that's interesting. Actually, I want to deep dive on that. So you're evaluating the long-term effects of network effects. So if we think about the key criteria and KPIs you look when you analyze these companies, what are the main criteria and KPIs that you look at whenever you evaluate these network effects companies?
You're basically looking at them from three angles, right? One, is this network effect even viable? Is it possible to create a network effect here? Second, is it scalable? As you build this company and you scale, do your unit economics actually, are they likely to get better? Third is defensibility. Once you scale, what is the likelihood that somebody can clone you and effectively compete with you? And there's a couple of factors that affect this, right? So, for example, fragmentation is one of those things that affects the viability of the network effect. If you have 5, 10 users on one side of the network, odds are you're not really going to build a viable network. You'll end up being a distribution channel, very, very low margin. Scalability generally depends on, do you need to build liquidity in every tiny region from scratch, or fundamentally is this network cross-border? The more cross-border it is, the more scalable it is. Defensibility, and how unique is each supply unit on the marketplace or each supplier on the marketplace, depending on what the value proposition is. The more unique each individual unit is, and this is different from unique supply. Sometimes people say that this marketplace has supply that no other marketplace has. That's a short-term advantage, because if a buyer perceives all of your supply as unique, I don't get this anywhere else, but they're all the same to me on your marketplace, that fundamentally is very easy to compete with. Because as a competitor, you generally don't need a ton of supply to compete. You need a few suppliers to get to that value proposition. Whereas if a buyer perceives each supplier on your marketplace as different, then you need to, as a competitor, build critical mass in all of those different categories, which is very, very hard to do. So on a long-term basis, these are some of the factors I'm looking at. There's other complications you can layer on in this, right? So when does SaaS become relevant in a marketplace? So there's lots of different factors. So do buyers and suppliers get to swap places? But I'm giving you sort of high-level strokes.
And for more, there is always your course, which again, I highly recommend. But so what are the do's and don'ts when setting up a marketplace business? You give founders some advice here.
I mean, there's the book, The Cold Start Problem, right? I mean, not the biggest fan of that book, but the core idea of that book is very valid, right? The idea that you want to create a small, what I call a minimum viable network, what Andrew Chen calls an atomic network, to begin with. When you're starting out, your goal is not growth. Do not grow too early. And I'll especially say this, usually when you see pre-seed network and marketplace founders that go and get a generalist investor, this is a problem they often run into, because investors are pushing them for growth and the product is not ready for growth yet, because you do not have a small core engaged base of users just yet. So founders push back against your investors, do not grow too early. What you want to see is strong engagement and retention up front. Once you crack that, then you can grow. If you grow before that, it is going to be a disaster. So I guess that's both a do and a don't. Second one is track everything. Fundamentally, when you're building a business with network effects, the users are the product. What you're building is simply an enabler, which means that the metrics really show the story. The behavior of users is what the product actually is. And so if you're not measuring that on a very, very granular level, you'd have no idea how your product's working. So again, top line growth, not meaningful. People sometimes lean into North Star metrics. At early stage, pre-seed and seed, the North Star metric does not matter. You can look at that once you have a large enough team where you need to align everyone against that metric, usually that's Series A and beyond. Early on, you need to be very, very granular with your metrics. That means tracking an awful lot of metrics. In particular, what I call retention to core action. So what is a user meant to be doing on that product? How often do they come back and do that again? What's the propensity of them to come back next month or next week or to go and do that? So tracking, exceptionally important. Third, be careful about incentives. Incentives can often skew the behavior of users. One of the things that James Clear likes to say is that find your white hot center. The idea of that is you want to find the users that are starving for a product like this because it solves a key problem for them. And fundamentally, incentives are not a great way to find those users because incentives will suck in other users that are not as married to the idea of solving this problem. And so you don't really find the early engagement retention starts to break, and then you can't build a viable network or marketplace.
No, I totally agree with everything. Actually, I was with a founder yesterday who said exactly the same thing around point three. And then also yesterday, I was listening to the show, and I think it was Faraz from Lightspeed who said something of the likes of, you need to develop an understanding of what drives engagement and what drives retention and fully embed it in your product, because that is critical for success for any consumer platform, especially if it is a social plus platform. But then if we look about the cold start problem, if we go back to that for 1 second, what is the one piece of advice that you would give marketplace founders who are trying to solve this? I guess it's kind of like what you said before, but if there's one piece of advice we should focus on.
Build a minimum viable marketplace. Your goal on day one is not to grow quickly. Your goal on day one is to have the smallest possible marketplace where you have liquidity, essentially transactions flowing back and forth. So essentially, if you have 100 users and they're doing 1,000 transactions, that is fantastic. If you have 1,000 users and they're doing 10 transactions, that is terrible. So the scale of your user base does not matter. Your GMV does not matter. All that matters is liquidity.
And any more lessons from your work in investing and advising marketplace businesses? What are your favorite case studies you always suggest marketplace founders in study in detail, and why did you choose them?
It's a good question. I mean, there's lots of different ones depending on the type of marketplace you have. If we're talking plain vanilla marketplace, I'll always ask everyone to look at Airbnb. It's basically the gold standard of marketplaces, and more importantly, it's very, very easy to understand. Especially if you're building a consumer business, it's not an overly complex business. You understand how it works, but they've managed to get some key properties right. Another one that I recommend is Cameo, because, and I recommend this to both founders and investors, because oftentimes investors kind of have this mistaken perception that you need to have high AOV and or high frequency in a marketplace for it to be valuable. Cameo is a marketplace where like AOVs, I'm guessing $50, and people use it like once a year tops. It's wildly successful because fundamentally the structure of their marketplace is right. They are by default cross-border. Their supply is highly differentiated. Every celebrity is unique. You're looking for something specific. You're not looking for any celebrity. They're also extremely viral, which really does help in their case especially. So there's a lot of these ideas start to get debunked when you look at cases like Cameo. If you're founder that's sort of trying to combine different forms of network effects, the one I always recommend is Poshmark in the US. Generally not talked about that much because it's not a massive company, and they've had some struggles in public markets. But if you look at the actual interaction, it's very, very, very interesting, because one of the things people misunderstand about network effects is people think that companies have network effects or products have network effects. Both of them are wrong. Interactions have network effects. So if you want to understand a network effect, you need to get down to the level of the interaction. What do users do to interact with each other? And then Poshmark is really elegant because you've got two different forms of interactions. You have a social interaction where users follow each other, discover stuff, like stuff. And then you have the marketplace interaction where you're actually transacting. And so the ability to stack or layer multiple forms of interactions on each other and creating multiple forms of mutually reinforcing network effects, Poshmark is a fantastic example.
That is fantastic. And I remember you touched upon it when in your course as well. So we talked about network interaction, so user interaction, marketplace interaction, and we've applied these to Web3 networks actually. So you said tokens are seen as a way to solve the cold start problem. However, it is not as simple, and the fundamental rules of the networks do not change. So without spoiling the topic of your live talk too much during the marketplace conference, could you give us a sneak peek and tell us what these fundamental rules are?
The fundamental rules are, if you stick to the rule of finding your white hot center, finding the most underserved users for your network, tokens aren't necessarily the best way to attract those users, right? Because what's the idea of a token? It's a financial incentive for someone to join a network early because they'll get a big upside from it. Now, a financial incentive appeals to everyone. It doesn't necessarily appeal to the most underserved users. So let's say you use your token incentives and you manage to attract 100,000 users. What are the odds that X% of them are the most underserved users? And so then what would happen? So they've signed up onto your product. Let's say it's a marketplace. You've got 50,000 buyers, 50,000 sellers. If they're not the most underserved users, their biggest incentive is the token. They've got the token, they're trading the token, but they're not deeply engaged with the product itself. Whereas the most underserved users who come onto the product, let's say they're a buyer and you've got 10 of them, and they're looking through these listings from these 50,000 suppliers, and they're trying to engage with them, but they're not able to have a successful or a positive interaction because most of the people on the supply side do not care. They're not the most underserved users. So the odds of them actually finding a supplier who is underserved, who really, really cares about solving this problem is pretty low. Essentially, what you've done is you've polluted your product with an awful lot of users who shouldn't be there right now. It's possible they need to be there down the line, but not right now. There's certain types of products where this might not be a problem, right? Where essentially you don't need a ton of involvement from the people you're trying to attract. You just need them to hook something up, for example. So in those cases, it's fine. It'll help you bootstrap. You'll have other problems down the line, but at least it helps you solve that problem. So be very judicious when you're using tokens to bootstrap.
I guess we go back to be careful when you set up incentives because you might be attracting the wrong type of people as well. And I got a quick question actually. When you say underserved users, are you underserved users your pro users or not necessarily?
Do you mean power users or professional users?
Power users.
To an extent, yes. So the definition of a power user is someone who uses your product an awful lot. The concept of an underserved user is broadly similar, right? So for example, if you think about Airbnb, right? Originally, the people they were going after were, students who were trying to go to conferences, just didn't have the money to shell out for a hotel room. So they could sleep on somebody's couch. And that was something they couldn't do before. It solved a massive problem for them. All of a sudden, for very, very cheap, these guys could go to conferences where they would want to go to either network or find jobs, something that was very, very expensive for them to do before. Right? So that's the idea of an underserved user. Someone who has a massive problem that your product solves today. So not the future promise of your product, what your product is today. Right? So that they might end up becoming a power user. In Airbnb's case, I don't think they were necessarily power users. Like a student who was traveling to a conference, long term, they weren't the power users. Who were the power users? Who were people who traveled an awful lot, who had the money to spend. So long term, they became the power user, or business travelers became power users for Airbnb. So there's a bit of nuance there, but essentially the idea is the product as it is today, who does it solve the biggest possible problem for? It doesn't matter if those are 100 people or 50,000 people.
That's super clear. And so you've invested in 10 plus network effects businesses. So what is the most recent one you've invested in and what got you excited about it?
My last two were marketplaces. So the last one I've completed the investment for is a company called Farmland. It's a B2B marketplace for farm produce. So essentially a large farmer selling, 100K worth of strawberries to like a jam company or a retailer. And it's a SaaS-enabled marketplace as well. So the farmers, they're using a SaaS product to manage their orders and also essentially getting working capital loans from Farmland. So what happens is it creates a massive viral incentive for the farmers. The farmer really wants to use this tool because he wants to get paid now and not 3 months later. And Farmland allows them to do that. And in order to do that, they need to essentially route their transactions through Farmland, which means buyers get introduced to Farmland every time they use it. So that supply-side viral loop was really interesting for me. In general, B2B marketplaces can be really hard. And anytime you're stuck with doing direct sales on both sides of the marketplace, it's going to be messy. So in this case, they don't have to do that. You literally just have to focus direct sales efforts on the supply side, and the supply side get the buyers on. So it helps you solve the cold start problem in that way. And frankly, you're not as resource intensive.
Congratulations on this latest investment. And before we go, actually wanted to ask for founders and investors alike who are listening to us right now, what are some of the resources that you suggest founders and investors who are interested in studying deeper the network effects, let's say going down the rabbit hole of network effects, as well as maybe some of the names of investors that you expect in the
NFX
space?
is the most obvious one, of course. I've always been a big fan of James Courier. I have like certain disagreements with the way he categorizes something than I do, but I massively respect him. Probably one of the rock stars in the network effect space, right? So anything that he's written or any of his videos, I would strongly recommend. For anyone looking at marketplaces, I would recommend Josh Breinlinger. So he's a VC in the US and runs a fund called Turtle Ventures. His blog is called acrowdedspace.com. Very, very strongly recommend him, especially if you're looking into disintermediation. There's no one better. He's sort of more of a niche name, but I'd put him right up there with James Courier in terms of quality. If you want to get tactical tips and advice, Lenny Richitsky is as good as they come. And if you really, really want to get deep down into product execution and what kind of tactics you want to use on day one or year three, Lenny is someone I'd strongly recommend. I'd say yeah, those are my top three.
Thank you so much, Samir. It's always a pleasure talking to you. I learned so much. I was taking notes all the way, and I can't wait to see you in Berlin at the Marketplace conference.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, Paola.